I don't think it's enough to just focus about the unemployment rate anymore. I actually think that we need to make a distinction between jobs and good jobs. And good jobs are something quite different. You know it when you see it. And you know it when it's not there. I hate consensus decision making. I believe so strongly in accountability and ownership. And those two things are so paired together. You want ownership, you have to have accountability. Building for small businesses is the best and worst of both consumer and enterprise at the same time. They have all of the same expectations as a consumer using software.
John, welcome to Fintech Leaders.
Thank you for having me. It's good to talk.
Yeah, I'm excited to learn about the Homebase story and specifically your story as well. And that's where I think it's a good place to start. Maybe share a bit about your background, and then we'll dive into, of course, the origin story for Homebase.
Yeah, I'll start with just a quick background of what Homebase is. We're the largest team management platform for local businesses. So the way I think about it is, we serve your favorite local businesses, coffee shops, retail, restaurant, neighborhood services, dog groomers, the full range of local businesses that build the great communities with everything that they need to build and manage their teams. So that is what we do here at Homebase. I've been doing this for now a little over a decade. Really launched Homebase in 2014. So really hit 10 years last year. Before that, I worked in consulting at BCG and then was in the operating team at KKR Capstone. But going back before that, my very first job was indeed at a local business. I rented tuxedos at Mr. Formal in Bellevue, Washington, where I grew up.
Do you know a lot about tuxedos today?
Not as much as I used to, but for sure, you want to talk lapels, I got you. Can still hem pants, sew on buttons. A lot of those very valuable life skills that you learn when you're in the tuxedo rental business. But actually, if I think about it, the things that most stick with me from that are one, as a sales job. I was learning how to sell, how to be comfortable talking to folks when I was in high school, talking to wedding parties, things like that. The other part of it is that I will always remember is I remember the day that I was trusted to do the money drop, take all of the cash. And this was still like mostly cash, take that big bag of cash and drop it off to the bank after I closed down the store. And, I was 16, 17 at the time. That was just like a crazy amount of responsibility I felt, but I think that that's actually like very much influenced the way that I think about company building today, which is always, give people a little bit more responsibility than maybe they think they can handle, but you think they can handle. Pull people.
So you spent some years as a consultant, also as a private equity investor, right?
On the operating side.
Operating.
So,
I got it.
yeah.
Operating.
So once we had invested in the companies.
I guess the answer is, do you think you could have started Homebase just off of the consulting experience, or was the operating experience crucial?
It's interesting. I don't really think about it that way. I will say I was always a pretty entrepreneurial kid. We could get into that, but I was selling stuff on the internet when I was 12. So I think that there's a little entrepreneurial spark that was always there. I think when I look backwards at those experiences, I think that they prepared my mind for the opportunity and the impact that I wanted to have in the world. Because what I did when I was at BCG is I did a lot of retail consulting, working with large retailers. When I was at KKR, I spent a lot of time in small business tech and knew that I loved kind of helping small businesses and was just a huge believer in the technology change that was coming to small businesses. Those things kind of combined with, ultimately the real inspiration for Homebase was a very good childhood friend who had opened and was running a restaurant. My sister was working in restaurants at the time, and kind of knowing the challenges that they were going through in their respective parts. And I think, when I look back at the time at KKR and BCG, a lot of it was kind of being able to connect the dots for a way that I felt like I could have a big impact in the world and create a company to solve some big problems.
Yeah, I've seen that story kind of repeated itself a few times. One of my recent guests, for example, was Dara Murphy, who was the CEO of Imprint. He was a consultant for FIG, right? Financial Industry Group. And now he's building a fintech because he saw what his clients were doing right or wrong. I guess there's a bit of that for you as well. John, going back to the beginning of Homebase, maybe tell us a little bit of kind of those initial days. And I'm always curious, how did you find your first hires?
There's a good story there, actually. I had never built software before. I had never really worked at a software company. And so starting a company was a big jump, especially one through which the impact that I wanted to have was through software. But I was so convicted in the opportunity. I went back to Stanford for business school. While I was there, I was spending a lot of time at the D school, and I was taking classes over there and kind of exploring different themes around this larger question, which was what my friends were dealing with, what my sister was dealing with, which was, hey, there's a tremendous 20+% of the US workforce had not benefited from technology in their work life. That was like the core problem. And so what that looked like for my friend in small business, what it looked like for all the small business owners that I knew, and I had a lot of friends who were running small businesses at the time, was that they were spending just huge amounts of time solving pretty mundane things that software was pretty good at solving at that point. On the flip side, my sister was, calling in to figure out when she was working. She was tracking her hours in a notebook to make sure she was getting paid correctly. Again, like very basic problems. And it was never a question of like, could software solve these things? It was a question of like, how do you bring the totality of this work online? So that was the thing that like really captivated me. It's like, well, if we brought this work online, we could solve a lot of these day-to-day problems. But man, the opportunity for much larger impact also felt obvious. I had never built software before. So that was like a core challenge. The first few engineers that I hired off Craigslist on a project basis. And I had never written anything that looked remotely like code since like HTML and a little bit in college, but like building websites and stuff in high school. But certainly I had never built software before. I didn't know how to evaluate their code, but there was something that I could evaluate. There are two things that I was looking for, which was one, did they understand the problem? And those first engineers were people who like really understood. One of them's mom owned a small business, and he would spend a lot of time in that small business helping her with her problems. Other engineer worked in coffee shops, understood the employee side of this, what this felt like. The other thing that I could absolutely see was craft. Are these people that cared about the code that they were writing, the products that they were building? If they had a bug in what they released, did they take it personally? And so I couldn't judge and look at their code and be like, this is good code. I could absolutely look at, the level of craft that they were putting into it. And again, I think that was like an early lesson in Homebase that has scaled with the company.
Yeah, that project that you posted on Craigslist, I guess, was the interview, right? It's like an internship where you bring someone on board.
Yeah, and at that point, I was just like, hey, I'm trying to build some prototypes. I'm just trying to see if there's something there. But it just like wheels started spinning from there, and it here we are.
I've talked to a lot of company leaders, and they tell you about the importance of, the first 5 to 10 employees. I think Renaud Laplanche from Upgrade and Lending Club, he swears by this. And it's like, if you bring B+ hires from the beginning, they're only going to be able to bring B, B-, and below. So you got to start with top-notch people. On top of that, bring the right culture. You've kind of mentioned this already, right? If they care about their craft, that's also part of the culture. How did the culture evolve for the first kind of couple dozen employees, and also looking later?
So first, I totally believe in the importance of that early team. And I feel so lucky in the early team that came together at Homebase and kind of set the foundation of the culture that we still have today. The thing that was true then, and I think has been true about Homebase through the entire journey, was first and foremost an absolute care for the customer that we serve and a maniacal focus on the customer that we serve. I would like from the beginning of Homebase, I think we were somewhat agnostic on what's the starting product, what are we building, because we had a very long-term view of here's what this will be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, here's the platform that we are building towards. But the thing that we were always very concrete on, this is the customer that we serve. We are built to serve local business teams. Everything we do is through the lens of the customer that we chose to serve. And I think that was a radically clarifying thing in the team that we pulled together. For still to this day, I think if you were talking to folks at Homebase around why did you join Homebase, that mission is still going to be a huge, huge part of it. You're going to find a lot of people who are from small business families who have friends who run small businesses. We have people at Homebase who have small businesses on the side. This is something that we care deeply about as a company, and that foundation was set at the very beginning.
One thing I've heard in the past is if you want to look at the future of B2B technology, look at consumer technology today, but still, like, that's not enough. When you try to implement and get B2B users to use this modern technology, there's a lot of resistance for many reasons. Do you remember those initial customers? Like, how was adoption? Was it easy? Was it hard? How did you convince customers?
Yeah, well, I think that's a totally interesting insight on how B2B kind of follows what consumer software looks like. Though I think that is also pointing to like what is unique about small business and what is unique about the small business world. I always think of like the small business building for small businesses is the best and worst of both consumer and enterprise at the same time. Like, yes, you're solving real problems and it's predictable and you can deliver value in like very predictable ways to make their lives easier, but they have all of the same expectations as a consumer using software. They want very well designed products. They want easy to use products. They want products that are accessible and available and polished and all of those things. That's a very high bar in building B2B products, but I think it is a great bar. It's part of what makes it so fun to build for small businesses because you can build something very different. I felt very fortunate. Our early customers were all people that I knew very well and really were making a bet on us to build the product that could solve a whole host of problems for them. And I look back on, the product people were using for the first year of Homebase. I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe that was an actual operating platform for a business. It feels so limited relative to where we are today. But I think that there was magic in there of choosing those customers who were not just committed to like, I'm trying to solve this one thing, but also were committed to the much bigger vision of what Homebase could be, because we were always quite clear in that.
And once you started selling to customers that were complete unknowns, what insights did you get?
Yeah, there's like so many memories that I think of from those early days. Like I can remember the first time, early days of Homebase, I had like the group that I knew well and were serving. And then I was going personally door to door, just kind of like selling Homebase in the peninsula. I knew like so many local business owners in the peninsula. And I was just selling Homebase door to door. So that introduced me to some customers, but I will never forget like the first customer that signed up, Pizza Hacker in the Mission, who signed up as a referral from one of the existing customers. It was like, oh my God, here's a business that signed up that I have never met before. That was like a very magical feeling. And I will never forget then, we had like a landing page up and we're starting to like let people sign up that way. And I will never forget the first time like a sign up came through just randomly through our landing page. It's like, that was a business in Oregon. Those things like very much stick with me. But I think the thing that we had is like, we were solving such acute pain points for these business owners very early on that the natural gravity to the product was there. We were a freemium product that was solving very, very real pain points for them. And so the pull from the beginning was really there. And then we were in that kind of product nirvana of they're just telling us how to make the product better, which is a great place to be as a product manager.
So help us paint the picture. What was the first product and how has the company evolved today, where today you're a huge ecosystem?
So we started with scheduling and time tracking and then communication. Today we collectively think about those as the team app. A lot of what makes hourly work different lives in that product space. Now we're full platform for work. So payroll, HR, onboarding, financial tools for the workers, hiring tools, full platform to manage every part of the work. But we started with the scheduling, time tracking, and communication.
Got it. And so I gotta ask you, today, everyone is either injecting AI into their existing products or launching new ones that are LLMs first or AI first, however you want to define it. There's this question, and I know you think about this specifically. What impact is AI going to have in our society, in the workforce, especially, which is where you live and breathe every day, right? Especially what you will think a lot of vulnerable businesses against new technologies. What's your take here?
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of thoughts on this and do think about it a lot. I think from the beginning of Homebase, the reason why we chose to serve local businesses was out of a belief of the hugely important role that they play in our communities, in our economy. Everybody knows the stats around how they are the greatest creator of jobs that we have. We shouldn't take that for granted, and we should continue to support that. The other thing that I think about is that they are the greatest creators of economic opportunity that we have in this country. When you look at the percentage of business owners that don't have college degrees or are first or second generation immigrants or started their careers working at small businesses, there is no other industry like it. This is truly small businesses are the best thing that we have for upward mobility in this country. That matters a whole heck of a lot to the health of our country, and we shouldn't take it for granted. Now, in the early days of Homebase, I always conceptualized our mission in we will reduce the unemployment rate. Anybody who would join Homebase, I would say we will know that we have reached our potential as a business, as a company, as a product when we can measure our impact in the US unemployment rate. And I still feel that to this day, which is there's so many structural frictions that exist in this part of the labor market. How people find work, how they balance their schedules, how they're matching their availability to the schedules and things that they're working, the career progression, all that stuff. A lot of structural friction. Also, if you help small businesses thrive and you create more small businesses, they will create more jobs too. And so even when we're right now with a pretty historically low unemployment rate, there's still actually a fair amount of structural employment in there that I think we as a company will help solve for over time. So that's one. So that's true for the first 10 years of Homebase. I felt very strongly about that. Now, as we kind of hit this next stage and think about the impact of AI, I don't think it's enough to just focus about the unemployment rate anymore. I actually think that we need to make a distinction between jobs and good jobs. And good jobs are something quite different. You know it when you see it, and you know it when it's not there. And I think this is a thing that small businesses provide in spades too. They provide career opportunity, they provide community, they provide learning and development, they provide a hell of a lot more than just income. Jobs provide income. Good jobs are providing a lot more than that. I think as we think about how AI shifts work, we need to also talk about what is the quality and nature of these jobs that exist in the world. And so I say that because I think the greatest weapon that we have as a country to make sure that AI is a job creator and a creator of good jobs is local businesses. When you think about kind of using AI to save time for small business owners, you're not eliminating a small business owner. All you are doing is creating more small business owners. That is the magical thing about bringing AI into small business. We save small business owners today on average 5 to 10 hours a week. That's a lot of time to give back to a small business owner. Our product challenge is how are we doubling that? How are we tripling that over the next year? What are the ways that we can just radically enable small business owners in the way that they manage their teams? And I think if we do that, we're going to see a lot of job creation happen.
Are you guys starting to deploy any tools?
Oh, for sure. I mean, we've got some stuff that we launched in the fall of last year, but we've got a lot that we are working on right now that's been underway for a bit and that we'll be launching publicly later this spring, but a lot of very exciting stuff.
Let's talk about the data that you're seeing from your customers, because that's something you certainly have, and that's data, which I'm sure informs, number one, products that you are considering launching, and number two, the health or maybe trends amongst your customer base. Is this something you look at systemically?
Yeah, well, I guess for the context on this, they talk a little bit about our scale. If you're a local business, you're probably more familiar with Homebase. We serve 150,000 plus businesses last year, 3.8 million workers logged over 275 million shifts in Homebase. So there's a lot of people out in the world using Homebase, which is awesome. That feels so wonderful. Also, it does mean that we have a lot of data and a lot of perspective on what is happening in the real world economy. And we figured this out in the most unfortunate of ways, which was COVID, which was we were sitting there at the beginning of COVID and we were starting to see business closures happening across the country. And this is like back in a time where COVID was only in a couple of places. There weren't widespread lockdowns or anything like that, but we could see that businesses were starting to close, that they were kind of responding. And I think in that is something that is always true about small businesses, which they are so nimble and they're so entrepreneurial and so quick to move and react to changes in the world. And so they often are these barometers of what's happening in the larger market, what's happening in the larger labor force, because they react very quickly to stuff. And so during COVID, we just started sharing our data publicly with everybody who would take it, because we really were trying to raise alarm bells about how devastating these impacts were on local economies, on hourly workers. That then led our data to be used in lots of different places. Recently, we as an example, shared a lot of data around the impact from the LA wildfires. I mean, and the implications for those kinds of small business impacts on local economies and hourly workers. So our data, we view through the lens of small business advocacy at this point, which is continuing to share the huge role that small businesses and their teams are playing in the community.
And does it also inform your product creation?
I think we look at not from like a sharing the data. Obviously, we're always looking at how are we using data to make Homebase more powerful for our customers? What are the ways that we can simplify the decisions that they're making, reduce the time that they're spending, cut down on errors? All of those things, 100% we're thinking about from a data standpoint, not so much on how are we sharing the data.
Got it. And so what does influence your next steps when it comes to product development? I'm sure you have an internal process.
Yeah. We've always been in the fortunate position, which is we're swimming in good ideas over here. It's just a question of figuring out the great ones. And I think that that's always been true because we have always been focused on the customer that we serve rather than building a specific product. We're not a horizontal scheduling tool or a horizontal payroll tool, anything like that. We've always been about the customer that we serve and a set of problems that customer faces. And so the laundry list of things that we could go help them with is like never ending, right? And the ways that we can make those areas better. I think we're always trying to balance a couple of views, which is what's the biggest impact that we can deliver to the customers based on the way that they're using the product today? Strategically, like what's the ways that like on a longer term view that we can solve new problems for them? And then like the strategic lens over both of these of how are we building a platform where the value to our customer compounds over time? How do we make it such that the more products they're using from Homebase, the more time savings they're going to have, the better decisions they're going to make, the fewer errors they're going to have, and the more magical experiences that we can unlock for them. So I think that's like the larger overlay.
And kind of staying a little bit of getting an inside look of the company inner workings. Have you found ways to make the company more productive? Is there something around how you structure your team or how you run your own calendar, be it daily or weekly or monthly? The question is, how have you made Homebase and yourself more productive?
Everybody at Homebase is probably sick of hearing me talk about operating velocity because it is something that I believe so strongly in. The cycle time with which we operate as a company on how we build, how we learn, the decisions that we make, all of that matters so much to our success as a company and how quickly we are compounding our advantages and delivering even more value and impact to our customers. So I am a huge, huge believer in operating velocity. And I absolutely believe that you have to fight for it and you have to be intentional about it. And so that absolutely comes to a lot of the personal productivity, the ways that we're using tools to enable it. I think there's a lot of standard things that you'd probably expect that we're focused on and try to bring into the company. And I'm always learning from other companies on how they're doing this too. A bunch of companies I respect that are maniacal about this focus as well. And then I think honestly, we're like, what an exciting time to be building a company where a whole new wave of tools are getting introduced that are allowing us to radically rethink how work is getting done. I think that at this moment in time, I don't think there's ever been a more fun time to build product, but I also don't think there's been a more fun time to like build an organization. And you just think about ways that you get to be innovative and creative and reconfigure the way that things have been done for decades. That's really, really exciting to me. And I think we're just at the start of it.
Is there one thing that you think is the single biggest blocker for operational speed?
Single biggest blocker. I think I think you could ladder it up in a few ways. So first, I do think individuals have kind of like a natural speed at which they operate. And that's something that we look for when we are hiring and when we're doing performance evaluations and things like that. Like, don't discount the kind of impact that individual responsiveness and things like that have on the speed of the system in total. I think at a macro level, the speed of decisions matters a whole heck of a lot. Another thing people at Homebase will hear me say is I hate consensus decision making. I believe so strongly in accountability and ownership, and those two things are so paired together. You want ownership, you have to have accountability, but if you have ownership, like, that's one of the greatest accelerants that exists in a company. People just making decisions based on their best judgment and driving that change themselves.
And you mentioned there are a few companies you admire. Maybe you can share one or two of those organizations that have really nailed that culture.
Yeah, there's some companies that I look at that I think ship products at just an extraordinary pace. High quality, just move at a different speed. Ramps one of those companies for sure. Company that I learned from in terms of their practices a lot, Shopify. I think that they're very methodical, and people kind of overuse the term first principle, but I think that they're very first principled in thinking about how should we run a company to accomplish our organizational objectives, things like clearing the calendars, et cetera. So those are two examples that I definitely look to learn from.
Yeah. Some great companies for sure. Some former podcast guests in there as well. And so just thinking about the next decade, right, of Homebase, what has you excited? What has you the most excited?
Go back and say, I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be building product than there is right now. And I say this as somebody who obviously a huge catalyst for Homebase was the emergence of mobile and that opening up entirely new ways to rethink the employee experience in local businesses. This feels 10x more exciting in terms of what this is going to enable from a product standpoint. Now, what I will say in that is I do think the greatest companies are always bigger than any individual product. And I think that that's true here at Homebase. We're not about the products that we build. We're about the problems that we solve and the feelings that we create. And I try to always remember that. And so when I think about what does AI open up for us, and it obviously opens up totally new problems that we can solve, new ways of solving those problems towards accomplishing our larger mission, which is helping local business teams thrive through every part of the work experience. And I think the other part of this that will be true is, we started this company out of a core belief that the nature of work in local businesses was very, very different and had been radically underserved by technology. I feel so great to be in a position now to make sure that that is not true during the next big technology wave, that we can make sure that small businesses and hourly workers are getting the benefit of AI from the beginning of this technology trend.
And John, we've talked about this before. A lot of the listeners of the show they're actively building companies, be it, a junior product manager, engineer, or founder, doesn't matter. If you could go back and talk to yourself 10 years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
There's so many things that I look back on. It's like, I can't believe that I made that decision or operated that way. There's many, many times that I look back and think, if I was building Homebase today with everything that I have learned along the way, how much faster would things go? I think that there's been a lot of talk, obviously, over the last year. You've talked about it on your podcast a number of times about like founder mode and things like that. And I think that there's like a couple larger truths than this, but I think the one of the repeated themes in there is for sure advice that I would give myself, which is have more courage and conviction in your ideals and beliefs. At the early stage of a company, there is never, ever a better time to establish the precedent for what you want the culture to be. And I would say like the Overton window there is much wider than you think it is. How radically different you can think about what your culture is, how you work, the expectations of people who you join your company. You could be far more different in that than you think you can. And honestly, you're probably better served if you do, because it sets a strong precedent and filter for the kinds of people who join your company. So I think that's something that I think about. And then I think about along the way of, there's just as you're building a company, you start to get a lot of outside perspective, and you can read a lot and listen to a lot of podcasts and things like that. And you get kind of inundated with ideas and beliefs on company building. I think that it's really important to kind of maintain your personal conviction and beliefs in that, and have conviction about building the company that you want to build.
Yeah, and it sounds like you started with a certain type of conviction and an idea, and you're still chasing the exact same thing, or has something changed?
It's funny. I had one of our early investors tell me, I am the founder for which they see the fewest pivots or changes from the initial idea that they've ever invested in. And some of that's true. If I go back and we're doing a big company conference in 2 weeks, and I'm pulling out like a slide from the 2014 pitch deck when I raised money from Steve Anderson at Baseline and Aileen Lee at Cowboy at the time. And I'm pulling out one of the slides from that pitch deck back in 2014. And it's still very, like, you could pick that and you can see the company that we are today, and you can see the direction that we're going over the next 10 years. I mean, we have been pretty clear on what we were building here, which I think is probably why I feel so strongly about operating velocity.
Yeah. And it compounds, right?
Yeah.
If you keep chasing one thing. Before I let you
and to that, and I think, like, to your point of, like, it also helps you make sure you've got the right investors for the long-term journey too, which I think has been like a huge part of Homebase story as well. Incredible investors who have always supported the long-term ambitions of the company.
John, before I let you go, are there any books that you find yourself either recommending often, rereading, or that you just like?
I am a big reader, and every year I give everybody at Homebase a book. And I've got a bookshelf right behind me that's got a lot of those books that I do reference a lot, but I'll share a couple of the books that I have given to Homebase recently. Unreasonable Hospitality, great book. I think just a constant reminder for what it means to be in service, which is one of our core values as a company. I think the year before that, I gave Disney's Land by Richard Snow, which is the kind of creation of Disneyland. Incredible story about how, like, the attention to detail and the focus on quality and experience leads to something far bigger. And as we head into a world in which, like, we're all about creating magical experiences for local business teams, a reminder of kind of it's the details and the building blocks that point up to that. Last year, I gave The Score Takes Care of Itself. Bill Walsh, so much in that from an operational discipline standpoint, what it takes to build a great team, that I think is just like a great reminder for everybody who is managing a team, a part of a team, thinking about how to develop in their craft and what it takes. So those are a handful of ones that I've given recently.
Some amazing recs. So thank you for that, John. Listen, I'm delighted that you stopped by, but more than that, I'm glad something like Homebase exists for small businesses. So thanks for doing this, and looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, thank you, Miguel. It was fun to talk.
The Fintech Leaders podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.